Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabi Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like faking it, futility, firsts, and fun.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives, and we'll look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're going to talk about fame, the pros and cons, how it's changed since the dawn of internet culture, and what it really feels like to be known by people you don't actually know.
We've both had our brushes with fame, Joanne.
Well, I don't know that they're equivalent, but I had a tiny one, so yes, we both have. Should we talk about it?
I think we should. Why don't we start by, for those listeners who don't know, let's talk about the different times that you and I have been a little bit famous. You want to go first?
Sure. I first went on the radio in college, so I don't think that counts, but I had a weekly radio show at Emerson College, but the radio tower was on the top of the tallest building in Boston, so the signal was beamed all throughout New England. And it was a jazz show, and it was literally the only jazz on the radio dial anywhere in New England in the afternoon. So suddenly we had ratings. So that's just the first tiniest. But then moved out here to the San Francisco Bay Area and worked in radio for about the next 20 years. And at different points during that period of time, I was always on the air, and I was always on the air using my real name. And somewhere in there also, I was on Evening Magazine, which was a very highly rated magazine format television show on the CBS affiliate in San Francisco. So in addition to my voice being recognized, which it had been for a number of years at that point, then my face was recognized too. And it was pretty weird. And we'll talk about how it felt and all of that in a minute. Yes?
Well, tell me, so this was a different time. I cannot tell you, and I know you and Fred are longtime radio people, but I got to admit, I can't really tell you the last time I listened to the radio in the car. I mean, we don't have Sirius. I think it's Sirius, which I know is a whole different kind of animal.
Satellite radio.
It used to be a really different thing. I do remember, when I was younger, and even in my 20s when I was commuting and, was driving in a car in San Francisco, I would listen to the radio in the morning, and I would got to know the host. And it was a really different time. And when you guys started, radio was really happening. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine this. Your entire contact with the outside world was through your radio as a teenager and as somebody in your 20s and beyond. Television was very distant. It was really, if anything, our parents' medium. What happened when I was in high school was it had always been AM radio, top 40, disc jockeys that talk like, hello, time and temperature, all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly FM radio came on the scene. We may have to do a whole episode on FM, so I don't want to give it all away. But the short of it is the people on your FM station spoke directly to you. So you had a station, and that station was your identity. And everyone else your age, it was like being in a club. You all listened to the same thing at the same time. So when you saw people, you could have this cultural reference to go back to because everybody had heard what happened that morning on the show. So Fred, our producer, also my husband, and I met while working at KSAN, which was the FM rock station in San Francisco in the 70s. If you were into rock, that's what you listened to. And later there were other stations that came on the scene. There were competitors and things changed. But so people knew you. And people knew my voice. And I remember the first time I was a new mom and ran to the grocery store wearing, some kind of disgusting sweat outfit and no makeup and my hair wasn't even combed or anything. And I was at the checkout stand and the woman said, "Oh, I know you." And she couldn't figure out how she knew me. And it suddenly dawned on me that it was my voice she was recognizing. We had never met. And then it started happening all the time that people, and they always thought they knew me. They always thought, I know you. Where have we met? And it would be this endless thing. And I didn't want to say, you don't know me. You just recognize my voice. But because that was, like, I'm a famous.
Well, and then you gotta talk about it. And, who knows whether you feel like talking about it, and who knows what, that's something we'll get into in a little bit. Is one thing about being a little famous or a lot famous is that people project all over you. And so they've got a whole relationship. And in your case, the relationship is mostly with your voice. You are in their car with them every day. And like, I'm listening, thinking about what you were saying about how it's like this club. And I totally remember that. I definitely remember even in the late 90s going to high school and showing up and talking to friends who'd been listening to the same station as I had and just talking about what they were talking about. There were, like 3 or 4 actually, or maybe 2 or 3 cool stations, quote unquote, that we would all listen to. And if there was something interesting happening or something funny that the DJs were talking about, we would actually talk about it that day. And so you are like the voice, you're the president of the club that everybody's in. So they all have a relationship with you.
And you're talking about in the car. In the car became the place where you listened. You always listened in the car, but back in the day, you also listened everywhere else. You listened in your office. The radio was always on. You listened in your bedroom. You listened in the shower. It was on at all times because it was the soundtrack. Otherwise, imagine this. Otherwise, you had to have an album and a turntable and, So this was just your way of accessing music and taking it with you. And learning about new music. That's the other thing. It's how you were turned on to new music.
That is so interesting. It sounds like, I'm just sort of thinking out loud, but it's like what gave way to us having our phones with us all the time. It's your porthole into the world outside of you.
Porthole and portal. I never realized how similar.
And portal. I use those words interchangeably.
For good reason. Tell us about your initial experiences with fame, Gabi.
Yeah. It was, so I started a food blog in 2009 called Broke Ass Gourmet, and it was right around the time when the stock market it was right after the stock market crashed and the economy was really bad. My friends were losing their jobs, but I was also living in San Francisco where everything was very expensive, and I knew all these people in tech who, like, everyone had either lots and lots of money or was barely scraping by, and I was in the latter category. But I grew up cooking and I've always loved cooking. And so I started this blog. I started it initially along with a friend, and then I took it on myself, and it was recipes that were less than $20. And I wasn't just claiming that they were cheap. I actually priced them out, and I said the cost of all the ingredients. I had what I called the $50 pantry, and anytime I used a pantry ingredient, I didn't count it because you should have pantry ingredients, and then everything was super cheap. And it was a concept that was kind of new at the time, and it took off. I got written up in Time magazine and where else? Like, I remember, I was like yahoo.com or some website that was really popular at the time. And all of a sudden, the traffic to the site was just exploding. And it was the beginning of all of a sudden realizing that I had the attention of a lot more people than I had. I was, sit in my crappy little apartment that I shared with a bunch of people, making these recipes and taking not very good photographs of them on my back porch. There were food bloggers who were doing a much better artistic job than I was. But I had a lot of heart, and I had kind of a different concept, and it got a lot of attention. And it led to a few things. I think around the same time, I was approached by a publisher and I got my first book deal. And that was for my first book called The Broke Ass Gourmet Cookbook. And then around that same time, I got an email from out of the blue from an agent at Creative Artist Agency, CAA, which I had never heard of because I didn't know anything about agencies, but I came to find out that they're one of the largest agencies in the world.
I thought they were the number one. At times they have been.
I think they are, yeah. They have been. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good agency. Once I started Googling who was a part of this agency, I got really excited. And it was this love. I think, I think there are a lot of schmucky agents out there, but the agents that I have worked with have by and large been total mensches, and Barry Kotler, who reached out to me, was no exception. He was so fantastic and such a nice guy. And he just said, I love your blog. I think it would make a good TV show. What do you think about, talking about that? And it was, not something I had ever thought of. He was thinking a sitcom. I had been, I'd played with the idea of making a cooking show at some point, but it seemed very pie in the sky. But we connected and ended up having coffee and one time when I was just going to be in LA. And then lo and behold, a year later, he sent me out to have meetings with some production companies. And there was a production company that really liked me. I really liked them. And we made a pilot, which, doesn't necessarily mean your show will be on the air. It was just to be tested. And that already was just insane and thrilling. And then the day I found out that the pilot got picked up to go to series, Evan, my husband, and I had been visiting his parents in Milwaukee, and there was a terrible storm. It was, I think, January of 2013 or 2014, and we were flying home. Oh no, we got stuck in Denver, and then we got stuck. We were in a plane. We were flying home from Denver. Finally, we were like 48 hours past when we were supposed to get home. And I turned my phone on after landing and I had, 25 voicemails and a million emails, and social media was exploding. And it was because they announced that the show got picked up, and it was just so we went straight to a restaurant in the airport and we got champagne, and it was just absolutely bananas. And so it was weird because I wasn't starring in the show. The show is called Young and Hungry, and it was on what is now called Freeform. It used to be ABC Family, and which is an affiliate of ABC and Disney. It's owned by Disney. And shows about a young woman named Gabi, who's a chef in San Francisco, and she gets a job working for this cute startup guy, and they have like a kind of a one-night stand, and then he hires her, and they have this on-again, off-again, will they, won't they thing, and it's a hilarious show, and it's so cute, and it ran for 5 seasons.
Did you write it?
I got to be a producer on it, and I didn't write it. No, there was a team of amazing writers. There were a few times when I got to consult on things because it took place in San Francisco where I was living at the time. And so there were times I think there's one joke. Oh, this is one of my proudest things. I made a joke about this cafe. At the time, it was kind of a new cafe in San Francisco, and it was very kind of cold and clinical looking. Everything is steel, and it didn't feel like a warm bakery. And I made a joke to the head writer, Dave Holden, who's hilarious and so talented. And I made a joke about how every time I go in there, I don't know whether to order a scone or have a pap smear because it feels like a medical office. And he put that in the show. So, in that sense, I contributed creatively, but mostly I sold what's called my life rights, which is basically my permission for the writers to use my likeness. And I consulted on a lot of stuff, and I got to be in an episode, which was really fun. And so it was like it was this weird experience of fame, though, because it was more like I did some social media stuff, and we had a web series that was fun that I starred in, where I cooked with the cast, and I cooked. They came to my apartment and cooked with Evan and me, and I did we did a bunch of episodes where I took the crew to the farmers market, and that was really fun. And so it was a lot of attention and focus on me that I wasn't expecting, or that I wasn't accustomed to. And it was this weird feeling of the show is not the Gabi Moskowitz show at all. It's definitely not a realistic portrayal of my life, because I say this with a lot of self-love. That would not be a very interesting show. I was
debatable.
When the show was made, I was in my early 30s with, thank you. I mean, with my lovely, stable boyfriend and, my cat, and it was before I had children, but it was, the sexy, fun life of Gabi Diamond, the fictional Gabi was much more interesting. So
an alter
or
ego,
at least for the kind of show they were trying to make. I'm sure there are people, an alter ego, right. It was this weird experience, though, because there was this thing that I had inspired that some people, a lot of people who didn't know who I was, suddenly knew who I was. But there were a lot of people who just loved the show and had no idea who I was. And so it was kind of weird and surreal to watch this thing that had come from me turn into this huge thing that made people millions and millions of dollars, and that got tons of attention, and to be both, and it's not at all that I wanted all of the attention. It was just very surreal to see it explode and be simultaneously very much a part of it, but also know that there were tons and tons and tons of people who were consuming it and had no idea about the roots. It was just very weird.
All right, there's a whole bunch I want to unpack here,
but that's kind of my main thing.
I just want to ask you two quick questions before we get into this notion of fame and how it impacts us, and how, you and I were both theater kids, so on some level we grew up wanting to be in the spotlight, and yet then when you are, all these other emotions come flooding in. Two quick questions. Are you a trained chef, or are you just somebody who loves to cook and you've learned a lot along the way?
The latter. I've taken cooking classes, but I never went to cooking school. I never even worked in a restaurant. I loved cooking. I really think of myself more of a writer and a food writer and a home cook. And I talk about home cooking, and I'm really not that interested in restaurant food. Like, people who don't know me will sometimes say, oh my gosh, you should start a restaurant. But running a restaurant is an amazing endeavor for those who do it, but it's not fun for me the way that getting to play in the kitchen and experimenting with which honestly I don't do nearly as much as I used to, because I am mostly focused on feeding a husband and small children and making as little of a mess as possible. But in my heyday, and hopefully,
and you will again,
soon,
and you will again. The other thing I wanted to say is, can we link in the show notes so that people can see Young and Hungry, so that people can see Broke Ass Gourmet and some of these things. Now,
Sure.
My radio shows are no longer available. I have them, but whatever we can link to, we will, because I know I am among many who would love to see, especially the episode that you played a part in.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I will. I think I even have a clip that's linkable. So yes, I will compile all of that and we'll put it in the show notes.
Sounds great.
So, I want to start. I mean, so you were asking, or you were starting to say that as theater kids, on some level, we kind of want this, and it's something that I have thought a lot about. Where were you at going into the public life world that you were in? What was it like? What did it feel like for you when you started to gain some notoriety and a little bit of fame? What did that feel like?
There was a little imposter syndrome going on for sure, because what I was doing was I was interviewing a lot of famous people. I was producing public affairs features, and I was in some ways acting like I knew about a lot of topics than I really knew. So there was a part of me, and I got really good at being able to ask the right questions without really knowing the answers, so that I could keep the conversation going and keep pace with people who were far more knowledgeable about something than I was. Eliciting, because really I didn't read every book of every author that I interviewed because I was doing so many interviews all the time. I mean, there's no way I could keep up
Who has
with
the
all
time?
of it, right? So it was more about picking really interesting topics and really interesting people, and then getting them to say fascinating, provocative things, and then guiding the conversation and the dialogue. But so there was some imposter syndrome. There was absolutely a little bit of inflated sense of self-importance, I would say, because, and then for many, many years, I was a news anchor. So I was delivering the news. And I was deciding there were people who were listening exclusively to that station, and that was their news source. So, I can think of a number when 3 Mile Island, when the nuclear accident happened. I was there and on the air when Jim Jones had everyone drink the tainted Kool-Aid in Jonestown. I was on the air. We literally just moved into the station and did reports ongoing day and night to keep people abreast, because it was a San Francisco story. The People's Temple was in San Francisco. So there were many times when Moscone Mayor Moscone and Dan White were assassinated. I was on the air. There were just many, many times. So it was extremely high profile locally and within a certain segment of the population. But here's the other thing. During that time period in my life, all my friends were on the radio too. That was my world. So it's not like it was that unusual in the little social circle in which I traveled. Everybody was. In fact, I remember when my son Danny was little and he would meet adults, he would say, "What station do you work for?" Because that's what he thought adults did. Adults worked for radio and television stations.
Oh, yeah. Anna is very confused about the fact that not everybody else's mommy and daddy write books. There are just books that her parents have written in her house, because both Evan and I have written books, and she does not understand how unique that is.
Of course. And our kids used to
always say,
it's a funny
lens for kids.
Our kids used to always say, "Why is it so complicated to explain what you do?" When people, and because over the years it evolved to include all kinds of things. For a while, I was hosting webinars, and I remember that both my kids, who were too young to really understand what that was, and my mom, who was too old to understand what that was. My mom used to say, "Joanne works in the internet." And I said, "No, you can't say that." "Okay, you do websites." "No, I don't do websites." "What are webinars?" "Well, they're sort of like radio shows, but there's not on the radio." It was like, forget it. It's very complicated. But now my son is working in Web 3.0, and I can't explain it. Something to do with blockchain technology, right? I don't get it.
I have no idea what blockchain technology is. If you know what blockchain technology is, write us an email at allthefwordspod@gmail.com, because we don't get it.
I kind of get it. I have a way of explaining it, but it's, I have my 10-second definition, my 15-second, my 30-second definition. But I know, here's what I do know. NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and very specifically, they are digital files that can't be copied. So there, you've learned something today. And,
right.
And they use blockchain technology. Mm-hmm. And of sum total of my knowledge, complete. Okay, back to fame. So
blockchain. Okay, yeah. Well,
it's very sophisticated, and it involves math, which not my wheelhouse. Let's just
we went
say.
to Emerson, Joanne.
Hello. Yeah. Last math class I took was Algebra 2. It's a very long time ago.
Me too.
I don't know what a quadratic equation is. I know it has parts. That's it. I shouldn't brag about this. But back to
Stay
fame.
tuned for.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Stay tuned for
I was
what?
going to make a joke that we'll do an episode on fractions. We'll do an episode on fractions.
It'll be a really short episode.
We'll try to explain math.
Okay, great. It'll be very humorous. I think we should have a few glasses of wine before we do that. No?
Drunk math. I'm probably better at it if I'm a little bit drunk. Yeah.
Okay, so fame. You know, there is something. I grew up thinking that was the be all end all. Now, I don't know if it's because of the kind of kid I was or if a lot of kids grow up thinking that. We now live in much, I would say, worse of a celebrity culture where celebrity is this prized possession. We have, influencers who don't necessarily have any skill or talent or anything, but they have fans and they have this instant fame, which comes quickly and goes. I have a nephew whose job it is to book tours, national tours for influencers. They aren't necessarily musicians. They may just stand up on a stage and act silly, and they fill the house. So fame has really changed, right? It used to be you were famous back in the day because you were in movies or because you were a singer.
Right.
Or because you were a politician.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I found I knew this already, but one thing that I focused my research on a lot is how much fame has changed. Not only did it used to be because of a talent, there was a lot more anonymity. If you wanted a picture of a celebrity, there were three ways to get it, but really only most likely two. One would be if you wanted a picture of a celebrity to look at, you would send them a letter and request a signed headshot. You might also cut a picture of them out of a magazine if you were so lucky as to find a magazine or a newspaper with their picture in it. And that's certainly not, it's not like you could go on the internet and Google image search them. Or if you just so happen to run into them and you just so happen to have a camera with you, and the likelihood of that seems kind of low, then maybe you might ask if you could take a picture with them. But now, first of all, there are so many more celebrities because there are so many more ways to be famous. And just from the fact that there are internet aside, there is so much more music being produced, so many more celebrities so many more television channels, movies being made with the streaming platforms. There's so much more content being produced. So even in the old-fashioned sense of who gets to become famous, that has increased so much. And celebrities talk all the time about, with the dawn of smartphones, if they're at the grocery store or at the movies or in sweats going to Starbucks, someone's going to take their picture. And it's not just paparazzi. Everybody is paparazzi now. So that has been a big shift in fame. So with fame comes a loss of privacy. Absolutely. And there's a sense of, I think we've always felt a sense of entitlement to information about celebrities, but I think it is really increased now. And now with social media, there's a lot of pressure on celebrities to feed into that. I don't think celebrities were sharing personal details about themselves quite so often back in the days. They just had publicists who managed everything. Correct. And by the way, you had fan clubs. That was a real big way to get photos or info about people. And then the other thing is you could buy posters. So when I was a kid, we had our, even like a preteen and a teen, you had your walls plastered with photos of your
stars, right? And it could be the actor on whom you had a crush. I'm remembering Steve McQueen, just different kinds of crazy things like that. But now it's like a celebrity a minute. So I would only imagine that teens have a different heartthrob all the time and that are excited about somebody else or somebody's story all the time. I mean, the fact that the Kardashians have stayed on front pages of something all this time is kind of shocking.
Absolutely. Right.
But I love that. What did you find out about this? People don't have to have had a talent. I'm interested in that.
So, well, what I didn't specifically look at people who don't have talents, but I looked at the shifts in how you used to get famous, like we were talking about with, you were in the right place at the right time. You auditioned and auditioned and auditioned, and eventually you started to be in movies. Pardon the small child in the background. But I looked a lot at influencer culture. So at people who if you go viral and you've got a thing you want to say and you can find a niche and you're lucky and, you seem to have a voice that resonates for whatever reason, and it seems like there are lots of different reasons your voice could resonate, it is possible to, whether for clout alone or clout and money, to maximize that and turn it into a something that is ongoing. I don't think it's necessarily sustainable unless you have time and money and energy to devote to it. But there are now people, and it's like so far beyond even the Kardashians. The Kardashians, one could argue that they're not famous for a good reason, but they had a television show, and that led to stuff. And that almost feels traditional and old-fashioned now compared to the way that people become famous now, which is because they had a TikTok video go viral, or they just develop a lot of Instagram followers because, there are high schoolers who have probably kids even younger. It's a whole other subject, the category that we're not even going to get into, which is about parents who monetize their children and turn their kids into influencers. But it's like this bananas world that even as a very online person, I don't fully understand. But it's like, I think for a lot of people, it's not even necessarily something they set out to do, but you go viral. And then if you can figure out how to keep on going viral, that turns into fame.
You have gone viral with a number of your TikTok videos, right?
I've gone like semi-viral with a few of them. I went really viral with one, and then I've gone viral on Twitter a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. And it is a weird experience, especially because in all of these cases, it was an offhand thought. I'm one of those people who puts a lot of, I sometimes put a lot of thought into what I share. And then sometimes I throw something at the wall to see if it sticks. And generally, it's those random thoughts. So I'll tell you about the times I went viral, and I'll tell you about the positive and negative things that happened. I posted a couple of months ago a video on TikTok. There was a filter that gave you like a beard and a septum ring. And I made a joke that there was this sort of meme going around where people were saying, if you don't think that you look attractive with this filter or this effect or whatever it's called, then you should lower your standards, because you as a guy, you should be attracted, if you're heterosexual, you should be attracted to the dude version of yourself, which is kind of a ridiculous thing. And I made the point that I wasn't attracted to the way I looked with a beard because I looked just like my brother. And it was, my hair was messy, and I had just finished eating lunch, and I was looking at TikTok. I had the thought, I put the camera up in front of my face, said it, edited nothing, posted it, and I believe to this date it has like 525,000 views. It was not a particularly special or thoughtful post, but it got a ton of attention. And I'll tell you, it's the only time I've gone viral where, for the most part, I haven't received a bunch of disgusting, probably because it was such a non-controversial thing that I was saying. It was the only time I've gone viral and not received a bunch of weird, negative hate. There have been pretty much every other time on Twitter, if I've said anything, even if it wasn't political, there's a lot of gross anti-woman and anti-Semitism stuff in my replies. So it's like, I think what I've learned from that is the more eyeballs you're in front of, the more likely, at least in my case, the more likely you are to receive crazy negative vitriol, because people are very brave on the internet and they say really messed up things. So
when we talk about the pros and cons of fame, right? So sometimes with fame comes money, but not always. Mm-hmm. Sometimes with fame comes privilege, opportunity, access, but not always. Mm-hmm. Often, if not
Sometimes
always,
the opposite,
with
depending
fame,
on.
yeah. Often, if not always, with fame comes a loss of privacy.
Yeah.
I would submit also responsibility, because if people are looking to you to influence their behavior, you have responsibility.
Well, I read
where I think not most influencers don't think that way.
That's true. Absolutely. And another really interesting angle of fame is I read a lot from former child stars who reflected on how fame has impacted their lives. And one thing that I kept seeing is that without anonymity, it is really hard to develop into who you really are. It can be really challenging when your image and who you're becoming is being reflected to you all the time in other people who you don't know. And all these other people are, like we were saying, are projecting onto you. It can be hard to see and feel yourself. And there's a great Mara Wilson, who was a child star. She was in lots of different movies, and The Stepmom and Matilda. She played Matilda in the late 90s movie. She wrote a great op-ed all about kind of what fame stole from her, and it's very moving. And I think that it really messes with early exposures to fame, and probably any exposure to fame, but especially when you're becoming who you are. I think it can really disrupt that development, and that is definitely something that I'm sure we see with teenage influencers.
I would think it would also be hard to be a partner of someone who had a lot of fame, because there would seem to be an inherent imbalance in the power dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a beautiful and moving piece in The Atlantic that we'll link to in the show notes. It's written by the daughter of Erik Erikson, the famous psychologist. And it's all about growing up in the shadow of this very famous man. And I think what she talks about is kind of how his fame was this presence that was always there, and how hard it is to feel like you have to share a special person to you with throngs of people to whom that person is so important. And I think that there's probably some version of that in every relationship where there's a real imbalance of fame. You know, I think it's weird as a famous person. It's uncomfortable for them to feel known by people who don't know them. And I think there's a whole other component for their family. When you and Fred were coming up in the radio business, was he on the air too?
Yes.
He was.
He was.
What was he hosting?
He was a disc jockey.
And
at different times. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So there were some years where my role was a bigger role, and some years where his role was a bigger role. Yeah, that was a whole other thing. We'll save that for the FM episode.
You guys were a real radio power couple.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but sort of. Kind of.
We'll get into it on the FM episode.
We sure will. So
Yeah.
on balance, what's our thing about fame? Not so great?
I mean, I think it's a proceed with caution kind of thing. I think it's important to, if you're somebody who desperately wants to be famous, maybe meet with a therapist and explore why that is. And if you find yourself accidentally famous, if you go viral for some dumb thing you said on Twitter or some silly little thing you said on TikTok, mute your replies. You don't need to know what everybody thinks. Just because you said something and they had something to say about it, mute your replies. In fact,
mute your replies.
Yeah.
She said it here first.
Thanks so much for listening to All the F Words.
You can follow us on social media at All the F Words Pod on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
And email us at allthefwordspod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
And please rate us and review us. Bye-bye.
Bye.